Again, my name is Steve Wada. I'm also based here in Southern California, not too far away from DataON's facility. And with me today is Rami Roddy, who's a partner of mine on our team. Specifically, data center management was what we'll talk about. You'll hear us use the term DCM a few times. DCM is an offering from Intel, which we offer to our customers, in this case, a firm like DataON that uses our OEM platform that we offer to specialists that have specific value propositions in the market. But we also offer it to selected end user customers. It's a whole different business discussion, but let's focus on the integration of DCM into the DataON and Azure Stack HCI platform. I wanted to include Rami to actually show you a bit of the tool in action. We want to make sure the power stays on the ground. There's fantastic features in the hardware. There's fantastic features in the Must platform. How do we put those together? So, in fact, let me turn it over to Rami right now, and he can give you a view of the DCM product in action. Rami?
Thanks, Steve. Can you guys hear me and see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, so very quickly, I'm based in Portland, Oregon. I've been in this team for almost 6 years now. I'm more on the technical side, so I work closely with our partners and customers to help them adopt and take advantage and integrate DCM's capabilities into their solutions or their environments. And I also have a project or product management responsibility, so I work with our engineering team to prioritize and decide on our roadmap and upcoming features. And I work closely with our other Intel stakeholders, like our DSG partners and so on. So I had, first of all, time check. How much time do I have, just to make sure that I, plan accordingly?
You have about 15-20 minutes.
Okay, so then what I'm going to do is go over 1 or 2 key slides, which are important to explaining what DCM is, and then I'll switch to a live demo, if that's okay. All right. So DCM is a 10-year-old commercial solution that Intel has been developing for a decade, essentially. And what it essentially is it's a software solution that's designed to either be installed on a physical system or a virtual machine or a container. And it basically allows you to manage systems and other types of devices using their out-of-management ports. So that's what we call out-of-band. So on most recent servers and other types of devices, there's an RJ45 management port at the back that allows you to collect several types of telemetry that we'll talk about in a little bit through an embedded processor or microcontroller. And that therefore allows you to not have to depend on, installing agents on the system to be able to manage it remotely. Okay, so we started off obviously focusing on servers, but as the product grew, we eventually supported other types of devices, as I'll show in the next slide. And then we basically collect that telemetry and analyze it, do a lot of processing on it, and then expose it to the end customer, either through the console, the DCM console, which is shown over here, which is what I'll show you a demo of, but we also expose that programmatically via RESTful APIs right now. Okay, so one DCM instance can manage multiple locations as long as they're all in the same virtual network. So for example, I have in the DCM instance that I'll be showing, I have DCM installed on a NUC running Ubuntu. And since we're within Intel on a virtual environment, I'm able to manage devices in Oregon, in Arizona, and even in EMEA as well. but you don't have to set it up just like that. So you can have an environment with multiple DCM instances, and you can also connect them to each other and have what we call a portal mode. This portal mode is not, something that is set up by default, but can be done. We've done it before. Okay, so the next slide should illustrate this a little bit more. That's a slightly more deeper overview of what goes underneath there. So what DCM does is that it uses industry protocols like IPMI and Redfish, which essentially communicate with what's called the baseboard management controller, which is what the RJ45 jack, is connected to essentially. And then that baseboard management controller interacts with other components, namely for servers, we're talking about node manager or the equivalent of that, like ILO, IMM, etc. And the telemetry that it collects from those servers are essentially inventory, power, thermals, health, and utilization. And I say here when available because we support much older servers as well, and some of those do not, for example, expose utilization information or do not expose inventory in the way that most servers do today using Redfish. Okay, so like I said, over time, we also supported other types of devices, SNMP, SSH, and so on. And like I was saying before, we exposed that after doing a lot of analytics and processing and reporting to the end user via the web console or through RESTful APIs. Okay. And as Steve was mentioning before, our ecosystem is really large. So we not only work with OEMs to ensure that we support their latest and greatest server generations, but we also work with a lot of ISVs and like DataON. Actually, this this screen needs to be updated. Sorry about that. But to integrate DCM capabilities into their solutions. But also direct customers, anyone with a data center that needs a single pane of glass, relatively reasonably priced and vendor agnostic solution to manage their infrastructure. Which is why, like I said before, even though Intel's more on the server side of things, we eventually supported PDUs and storage devices and network devices as well. Okay. Yeah, I think with that, let me just switch to a demo and show you some of these things live instead of just depending on some screenshots. Okay. Oh, am I sharing? Do you see this now? I forgot if I shared my whole screen or just an app. Okay.
We see it.
Okay, so this is my own instance running in my lab. As you see here, it's running on a small NUC running Ubuntu. And assuming that you've already installed DCM and that you set it up to manage some devices, and I'll talk about how that can be done very easily. Once you log in, you're presented with this dashboard, which is customizable and contains a lot of different gadgets that give you this bird's eye view of your data center. From things like what we recently started focusing on, and like data center sustainability and carbon emissions, both on an actual or projected level, to a summary of your hierarchy and how you're doing in terms of space and power and capacity, and even more deeper, including things like how you're doing in terms of power, which devices are consuming the most power, how you're doing in terms of health, which systems have lost connectivity, which are deemed unhealthy, which components are actually suffering more than others, and a list of all the events that you may you've subscribed to from the settings tab, and I can show that in a second. And of course, some statistics about all the events that have happened recently. Okay, so this is really just to get you going and understand what's going on. So for example, you might want to start taking a look at this particular server. This is a server that's deemed to be the most power consuming device in my entire data center. So let's click on that and see where that takes me. So once I click on that, it takes me to the hierarchy tab, which basically shows you where that device exists in the physical hierarchy that you've already defined. Like you see here, I have one data center with multiple rooms, each room having multiple rows and so on. And for this device, you get to see its information, including its IP address. This is the BMC IP address, not the OS IP address. You see its capabilities, like what is being monitored exactly, its device model, its firmware details. So if I click here, you get to see the firmware versions of several subcomponents. A link to its management console. So if you want to remotely connect to that system and open a virtual KVM or launch, virtual media and install an OS remotely, you can do that. Okay, it might take a little bit longer. I think that's system has some issues, but believe me, this is how you do so. And then you can start to see things like its inventory, like the management modules, the storage devices, the details of those storage controllers, the number of NICs that you have here, and additional peripherals when available. Now this, like I said, this inventory section will vary from device to device, but the DCM exposes whatever that device is capable of exposing. And this is mostly done today by Redfish. Okay. You also start to see for all of the subcomponents of the system, which ones have current issues. So apparently there is a problem with this system's power supply, so it's worth looking into that. You can see a recent fault history. Okay, so obviously this power supply issue has been going on for a while, which may correlate to why this system is deemed, is consuming quite a bit of power, right? So I can now take a look, more in-depth look at the power and temperature graphs for this device over a period of time. So by default, it's an hour, but you can see all the way up to a year. By the way, DCM stores everything locally. It's an on-premise solution, so nothing is stored or sent externally or stored on the cloud. This has always been the case. This was a clear request from almost all of our partners to have an on-premise, secure solution. And everything is encrypted in a local PostgreSQL database. By default, DCM collects everything from all of the devices that it's monitoring for a year. And by default, DCM can accept or can monitor 20,000 nodes with a single instance. That is not an upper limit, but that is a healthy a healthy limit, I would say. You can go higher than that if needed by doing some tweaks, but without any changes or configuration changes or taking anything into consideration, DCM can support 20,000 nodes easily. And 20,000, 1 year of data for 20,000 nodes is almost 400 gigabytes, which is, I think, the only constraint when setting up DCM in an environment. It's not a big constraint, but because it's not in the order of terabytes, as one might think. Yeah, I just thought that would be worth mentioning. Anyway, so back to this. So obviously there's some problem with the system. You see here that it's consuming power because while the utilization is minimal, right? So the next step would be to take a deeper look at these events and these logs. There's a way to download the event logs from that server and take action accordingly. Right? So DCM won't really give you hints or suggestions on what to do, but it will give you all of the data that will help you make a quick decision. Okay. Any questions here before I move on? Okay. So, for example, this is another server. A more recent server. You might be familiar with this. The code name for the system is Coyote Pass. So this exposes a lot more inventory information, including our Intel GPUs as well. So I've been working quite a bit on that recently. So you get to see the CPU details, but also GPU details right now. Okay. Now, moving back to the dashboard. Actually, let me switch for a second. So I've already created.
Rami, quick question.
Yeah,
hey,
sure.
Current DataON customers, Andy, Ernie, would you guys want to use this if it's available to you?
So I've taken a look at this before, and it's definitely we have maybe like 20 plus nodes right now, maybe more, maybe less. And yeah, it's definitely something that has piqued our interest. There's the obvious limitation is onboarding everything, like doing like a network scan to pick up all the nodes, and then we've had a habit of putting in passwords, secure, like different passwords for each different node, just for security purposes. So like the onboarding portion obviously needs some manual love.
Yeah.
But so yeah, I mean, in terms of the product, it's been very usable.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. Actually, I was going to touch on that right now. So I've shown you how things look like when systems are already there. But to add systems, there's actually 3 ways. One is if you go to the devices, which shows you all of the devices that you have, regardless of the hierarchy. So here you can do more complicated searches and organization and whatnot. So the most tedious way is to add a device manually. So if I say Rami, I can choose this to be of type server or network or storage. And then for each type of device, you get to see all of the details. The top section here is what's essential. So basically the IP address for IPMI, the credentials, and if there's any keys. And then everything else is optional. But the more details you give to DCM, the more you can make use its features. For example, if you add the age, then you can start to get alerts when systems become a little bit old, and that might help you in your next server procurement. If you add weight, then you're able to do more weight management, which is important for raised floor environments. If you add owners, then you can set alerts to go to a specific owner. If you set warranty expiration, then you can get alerts for when that happens to take, again, action accordingly. If you enter the size of the device, then you can do more or better capacity planning. And if you add OS credentials, then you might be able to get additional details, like, for example, storage details from SmartMon tools, for example. And I can show that in a little bit. But like I said, these are not essential. The essential things are basically the credentials, which gives you the minimum of power, thermal, and health monitoring. Okay, so that's the tedious way. Now, the second way is to do a discovery or an import task. A discovery task suits what you just mentioned, doing a scan of your network. So here you give it a beginning address and an ending address, and assuming that the passwords or the credentials are the same, you can then very quickly just add those devices into DCM and then add them into the hierarchy later. But since you mentioned that your passwords are different, then you can also, by the way, add this or create a discovery task that is scheduled to run at recurrent times, for example, every day or every week. This is a relatively recent feature that we added based on customer feedback. But if that doesn't work for you, then the next best thing would be an import task, where here you give it essentially a CSV file of all of the systems that you want DCM to add. Each row would correspond to a device, and each column would correspond to all of the different fields that I just mentioned. Okay, and that is the fastest and easiest way to get yourself up and running with DCM. DCM will just go over each device and start adding them one by one.
I have 2 quick questions as a
Sure.
little bit of a follow-on to Ernie's comment.
Yeah.
One, can you use other than username and password for the IPMI authentication? For example, can we use SSH key pairs? Because
Yeah,
I
you can.
noticed in there so that we can have a scenario where the server generates a public key that I can then present to all the different
Yes.
IPMIs. Yeah.
Yeah, you definitely can. So IPMI is the default because it's the still the most dominant way of managing systems out of band. Redfish, basically HTTPS, is becoming the second most popular, but yes, you can use SSH as well.
Well, but I notice even when you're on IPMI, you have IPMI key as an option.
Yes, correct.
So can I forego the password and present because other solutions have the ability to authenticate to IPMI via a certificate pair or a key pair. Is that possible?
I haven't done that before. I may have misunderstood your question before. Sorry about that.
Yeah, because especially since we just had a penetration test here, and all of our IPMIs that were completely up to date, including the Intel ones and the HP ones, they were able to dump the passwords out of all of them. So we've switched almost, and we're in the process of switching everything over to key pair authentication.
So my off the top of my head, I think that yes, the answer to that question is yes, but I haven't done so myself. So
Okay.
I can confirm this offline and get back to you. But the fact that there's an IPMI key here, that kind of indicates to me that this is something that
Right.
that is possible.
That's what I'm hoping. Also, what about non-Intel devices? Can I throw an HP device in there?
Yeah, so absolutely. So like I said, we've worked with lots of OEMs in the past, and basically what we use is IPMI and Redfish for the communication. And we have different connectors within DCM to understand not just Node Manager, but which is what we use for our DSG servers, but also ILO, IMM, iDRAC. We do support all of those devices, and that's what makes DCM, like I said before, a single pane of glass vendor agnostic solution. We understand that. Yeah, we understand that lots of no data center will have one brand. It's really rare to find that situation, and that is why we spent many years on those different connectors to be able to support all of the. They're all of our partners in the end. So
wait, Andy, are you saying DataON is not your only love? You actually have HP?
No,
is that what
I have not. No, I have not bought an HP server since I've been here. The only servers I have bought have been DataON, but that doesn't mean they don't exist in my data center anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we've seen the complaint from many customers in the past. So like they need to use HP's tools to manage their ILO-based devices, iDRAC for others, PDUs, their specific PDU software for their PDUs. So that's essentially what helped DCM grow, is this intention to solve this problem by offering a true single pane of glass solution. It doesn't, we don't make a ton of money by doing so, but it helps the end user.
No, I appreciate it. Didn't mean to take you too far off track.
No problem. This is a good question. Okay. So
Yost has a question.
But Andy, you should ask the question also, how do I get it? And I will say, Andy, you have it already. DataON server already come with DCM, and I'm not going to charge you any more for it. So all the existing customer on the call, if I haven't spoke to you about this technology, even though it existed for a while, we haven't spent time on the server level management because we've been very focused on the Microsoft piece of it. But as our customer continue to grow their environment nodes, this request has become a part of the request when we talk to big customers. And that's why we engage with Intel. And what we learn also is because we have Intel exclusive servers, L9 servers, these DCM manager could work already with all your server today. So all the customer today, when you have DataON server, because DataON is exclusive Intel, you could load the DCM today and see all your environment instantaneously.
Yeah. Now you get additional benefits, of course, by using DCM for Intel servers and DataON servers. For example, provisioning, which is, I think you'll like this. So, for example, you probably would want eventually to not just update the firmware of those devices, but update them in groups, and also ensure that the BIOS settings are all identical on those servers. So you can really do this easily with DCM. And this is one of the differences, or one of the benefits for that DCM has, for managing DataON servers. So how this works is, if you notice here that the management module firmware version is showing 2.88. If I click on this, you'll see this histogram that shows you that in my entire environment, I have several servers of this model, 3 to be exact. Each one is running a different management module firmware version. So this is obviously not good. So this is a very quick indicator that I probably would want to resolve this because firmware versions may impact reliability, security, performance, and so on. So, and the same thing with all of the other kind of components here. If you look at this drive, you get to see that I only have one of those drives. So this is not really helpful, but actually you see what I'm talking about. A BIOS. So I have 2 servers of the same model running different BIOS versions. So again, might be worth updating. So how does that work? You click on the provisioning link over here, and this will allow you to provision this particular server. So you can send an update task for this particular server to run either now or at a specific time if you want to run it at night. You can load a firmware version on the server that's hosting DCM. That's what's called pre-configured. Or you can upload one from your local device from where you're accessing the console. And yeah, you also get the ability to automatically get notifications when there's a new firmware version available for the server. And you can do this not just for one device, but many. So if I go back here using the devices tab, I can say for all these servers that are exactly of the same model, I can provision them and do this firmware update for all of them. Now, if I chose one that's slightly different model, it will not be happy about that because it understands that they're not the same. So, so I can do this for all 3 devices in a single click. And to make things even easier, I don't have to look for these devices, but I can also create logical groups. For example, if you have a cluster that you're monitoring or managing in particular, you can say you can add the devices for that cluster and provision only those devices in that cluster. So making things much easier for you. And I know I'm running out of time here, but I think this is all important. With regards to provisioning, you can also create a provisioning task which gets the system options file from a specific server. What that does is that it reboots the server and creates a text-based dump of all the system settings that you can then edit manually offline. And then once you're done with that and happy with that, you can deploy it to multiple servers and ensure you have like a golden BIOS settings image for all of the systems. Or you can also change, single system setting at once. For example, if I want to change quiet boot or Intel VT for directed I/O. Okay.
Just to pile onto that real quick, another thing that has just happened in my world is we had to renew our cybersecurity insurance. And one of the provisions within that insurance policy is that any systems affected by a cyber event the claims would be denied if the firmware or operating system patches are more than 90 days out of date.
Wow. Okay.
What?
So if you run around not updating your firmware on your servers, put it in the rack and be happy with it, then at least the newer insurance policies are going to deny claims if you have a cyber event.
That is actually a feature that we're planning for our next release, which is another event. Remember that those events that I was telling you about before? Another event that shows you the last firmware version date alert. So like you said, if it's more than 90 days, then it would pop up an alert or show an indicator for that particular system that the firmware of the system is pretty old. So yes, that's not just showing you that there's a new firmware out there, but warning you that this one is quite old.
Thank you, Rami.
No problem. Okay.
Good.
Yeah. Do I have 2 more minutes, or
you do
need me to wrap
up?
Yeah. Okay.
You could wrap it up if you don't mind.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Absolutely. So that was basically the provisioning, and what else did I want to talk about here? There was something important. So mounting an ISO image, you can give DCM a Samba image path, Samba server image path, so that you can install an OS entirely remotely. And one cool thing that we just added is this batch provisioning, which allows you to do all 3 in a specific sequence for not just one device, but many devices. For example, you want 10 servers in the cluster to be number 1 updated with a certain firmware. Then you want to change the options, the system settings, and then mount an ISO image for all 10 servers at the same time. Okay. Okay, the last but not least, so in terms of inventory or hierarchy, you can also make this as sophisticated as you'd like it to be. So for example, for the room, if I click change to this tab and make a layout, you can create sophisticated blueprints of your rooms and show where each rack is, right? And then for each row, you can switch to a different view, which would show you the racks this way. And this is, again, another easy way to kind of identify, systems that have issues, overheating issues. Many times we would correlate this information with the layout of a room and identify airflow issues or obstructions causing systems to overheat and whatnot. Now, the absolute last thing that I need to talk about is sustainability. So this is brand new in DCM 5.0, which allows you to monitor, predict, and control your environment's carbon emissions. And it does that by doing 2 things. Number 1, you need to give DCM a couple of values here to use as a reference. For example, the electricity cost per kilowatt hour, your power usage effectiveness, and your carbon emissions factor. These are pretty, easy for most data centers to kind of input. And once you do that, you then DCM uses the power data that it's already collecting to kind of create those, those histograms, and you can then set thresholds for a monthly threshold or a yearly threshold. And what this then does is DCM can, if you wanted to, start to control the power consumption of those servers to ensure that you never hit those limits. Okay, so this is slightly similar to creating power capping policies, which DCM can also do. I'll actually delete this and start one here, and this will be the last thing that I show. So if I click here and say I want to add a power policy on this rack and say that I don't want this rack to reach more than 6,000 watts. Okay, and then I can say, if I know which servers are more important than others, I can say that this is critical, this is low, this is medium. This gives DCM some guidance as to which ones it can freely alter its power consumption or frequency. Okay, and you can set this as a permanent policy or make it recurrent or run it at a specific time. Yeah, and you can do this for one of two reasons: either to just set a power policy so that you never, insurance policy so that you never exceed the limit of the rack, but you can also do this to kind of squeeze in more racks, more servers per rack, and kind of increase your rack density that way. That may impact performance obviously a little bit, but it's all about finding that sweet spot between the savings of space and not impacting performance so much.